Hi, everybody. Today's Wednesday, October 15th, 2025, and our dear friend, our brother, Matt Ho, is here with us. Welcome back, Matt.
Hi, Nima. Good to see you.
The other day, I said, our dear friend, and to Colonel Wilkerson, and said, Did you take that line from Judge
That's
Napolitano?"
that's exactly what I thought just now.
I said, I have never heard him saying that.
Yeah, that the
Yeah.
judge likes to call that's his preferred term
Yeah.
of endearment is dear. Yeah, so if you
Yeah.
go on the judge's show, our dear friend, and it's just a really nice, it's a really nice warm thing. I mean, that's one thing that maybe folks who are watching, who watch your program, watch the judge, watch Danny Davis, or listen to the guys in Duran, or in this community of 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 commentators and interviewers that you're a part of, the warmth that's in it, like the camaraderie that's in it, and these friendships that we develop by doing these programs together. It's really quite something. I've been doing media commentary for 16 years now, and it was never like this. The first, more than 10 years of it, you got to know people and stuff, or if someone was particularly like-minded with you, where you shared the same political space or ideology, yeah, then you develop a relationship. But not like this, not the type of, I feel the warmth and the connection and the camaraderie that we have being a part of this relatively small group of commentators who are opposed, I guess to put it simply, to the American empire and to the excesses of it and the horrors of it and the atrocities of it. And so I'm grateful for it. And, I just want to make sure the folks out there are aware how genuine and sincere people like Nima are, people like the judge are, guys like Danny Davis has been a friend of mine for, knew
Yeah.
each other, a long
Great
time.
guy.
A
Yeah,
great
great.
guy. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
and then other folks out there too, that just, just, like my friend Scott, like Scott Horton, likes to say, I've got what Biden's got, and so I tend to forget things sometimes.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, yeah. In my opinion, that's amazing. Matt, let me start with the Donald Trump's so-called peace plan
Mm,
and what has happened in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh. In the aftermath of that meeting, we had Netanyahu talking with the American media and addressing what is the outcome, how what is his position after all, after this sort of move on the part of the United States. The two, Donald Trump went to Israel, then went to Egypt, and here is what Netanyahu thinks about the situation going forward.
Or the IDF is deployed to section. Mr. Trump says the war is over, but clearly the war is not over. The IDF is deployed to sections of Gaza still, and Hamas is still on the streets of Gaza. How can you say the war is over?
Well, we agreed to give peace a chance. We agreed that we should. The conditions in his 20-point plan are very clear. It's not only that we get the hostages out without getting our military out, but that we would subsequently have both demilitarization and disarmament. They're not the same thing. First, Hamas has to give up its arms. And second, you want to make sure that there are no weapons factories inside Gaza. There's no smuggling of weapons into Gaza. That's demilitarization. We agreed that that's part of the plan. And we also agreed, okay, let's get the first part done. And now let's give a chance to do the second part peacefully, which is my hope. But if not, I think I heard the president speak tonight. He said, listen, they better do it, or, how can I speak for him? He said, all hell breaks loose, okay? Well, I hope it doesn't. I hope we can do this peacefully, and we're certainly ready to do so.
Matt, you hear Netanyahu talking this way, and disarmament of Hamas, we know what does that mean. And on the other hand, you see Smotrich coming out in Israel after all of these meetings and talks and summit, and he comes, he said, we will establish Jewish settlement in
hmm
Gaza because settlement provides security. how can you imagine if Smotrich comes out and says something like this? How can you imagine that Hamas would ever consider being disarmed or take a new sort of direction towards some sort of negotiations with the United States and Israel?
Right. I mean, certainly the history, the very long history of this, of the conflict, the war, the occupation, decades, generations. So that's all built into Hamas's awareness and how how they understand the situation. Most especially the last 2 years. But the spectacle in Sharm el Sheikh, where you had all these leaders, including many European leaders, who rushed to Egypt to make sure that they were on the same stage as Donald Trump. In order to be seen in the photo ops, to make sure they've got a clip back home. And I just as an aside, certainly I'm not saying this from any type of nationalist, chauvinist point, but the way that Trump humiliated the European leaders, like that just delighted me. I mean, the way they were made to stand for 45 minutes in awkwardness behind him as he gave some long, rambling, idiotic speech. Again, similar to when he humiliated them when they were all in Washington, D.C. regarding Ukraine, Russia, and he made them all sit in front of his desk like school children, or when he got up out of a meeting just to go make a phone call, something that you just don't get up from other heads of state. I mean, right? So there is that enjoyment and satisfaction that I derived out of that. But for say Hamas, the Palestinian resistance, watching this spectacle, seeing these people who were happy, content, worked hard to go along with the genocide, to provide support for it in a variety of different ways, and then to be so duplicitous about it and to rush to be on that stage and to be champions of this new peace effort. And then you have, of course, I mean, I wrote this last week, where the conflict you can envision between who gets what part of the Gaza Strip. Where do the settlers' caravans and trailers and outposts go? And where do the Trump towers go? There's a report today about how Jared Kushner has put forward this plan to make Gaza this tech hub, to be this AI hub. And Larry Ellison, the second richest man in the world, who just bought Paramount Studios, who owns TikTok now, biggest friend the IDF has in the world outside of governments. He wants to put up 350, the plan would be, I think, $350 billion, but he wants to put up a substantial part to finance that. You mean, so if you're the Palestinian resistance and you're looking at this, you just see the duplicity. And with the media coverage in this has just been, I just actually emailed, I hardly ever reach out to reporters, but I emailed an Associated Press reporter earlier today about just, can you please let me know seriously, what are your editorial guidelines in terms of describing Israelis as hostages, including Israeli soldiers who were taking an armed combat and are technically prisoners of war, versus Palestinians who, in this reporter's own article, she wrote that the 1,750 Palestinians were prisoners. They have been seized and held without charges from Gaza. And I said, what's your editorial guideline here? How do you call these people hostages when they are prisoners of war? And how do you call these people prisoners when in your own writing you describe them as being seized and held without charge, let alone the fact that those who actually were charged and convicted, the 250 Palestinians who were returned or sent into exile, these are men who were convicted in Israeli military courts that have a 99.7 conviction rate. I mean, these are courts that have been decried by the United Nations, by the EU, by the international human rights organizations, right? I mean, but so you see the continual complicity by the media in this to keep going with the narrative. And I think some of that, of course, is their loyalties, but also too, the mainstream media, the corporate media, hates to have to change their narrative. They hate to have to recognize that they were wrong. So we saw in that clip with Netanyahu there from CBS, like the teeing it up, right? The giving Netanyahu the questions he wanted to, one, present himself as the peacemaker, as the man who wants peace, but also two, establishing the narrative, getting that in place to say, look, we talked about this. If Hamas wasn't going to take this seriously, which we are now going to have to go back to fighting, which I think everyone who's been watching this understands. It's just a question of when. I mean, everyone who's not coming into this with nothing but skepticism, you're a fool, or you just simply don't know anything about this. And so I think that's the question that the Palestinians are trying to tread. How do they keep aspects of the ceasefire going, including getting aid in for their people, without crossing whatever imaginary line that's out there by the Israelis and the Americans to resume the genocide? Because it seems like it's just a question. I mean, this last thing, but this whole question of the Palestinians not returning the Israeli deceased bodies fast enough, that was it's as if that was set up. It's as if that was planned, that the Israelis knew there was no way they were going to be able to recover all the bodies, because many of those bodies who were hostages killed by Israeli airstrikes, some of them were killed actually, if you recall, go back a couple, year or so, 3 Israeli hostages escaped and they were gunned down by the Israeli army in the middle of the street. There's so many horrors to this, Nima, that we've forgotten. But it seems as if this whole structure, this whole thing was set up for it to fail. That the Israelis knew that the Palestinians were not going to be able to get all the bodies back from Israeli hostages, because they're either buried under 8 stories of rubble, or they're in areas that are still controlled by the IDF. And the Western media, of course, doesn't examine any of that. So, it just seems as if you're the Palestinians, if you're looking at this, you just see everything aligned against you. And the idea of how do we walk this path without hitting the trigger that's going to resume the genocide, knowing full well that that's the whole plan. And let me close my blinds here so that I get rid of the little light.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, that's still.
Yeah.
There it is. It's this thing on my desk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Matt, do you think that what has happened in Egypt, what was that? What is, if you want to put out something positive politically, geopolitically, I don't know, militarily, what was the importance of it, in your opinion?
Oh, it was a tremendous photo op, right? I mean, you had when was the last time you saw that many world leaders rush to something? I mean, these were heads of state that dropped everything to be in Egypt within 2 days. And then again, they were humiliated. They were made to sit behind Trump. They were made to stand behind him. There's this clip, if people haven't seen it, where Trump Keir Starmer, the prime minister of the United Kingdom, is standing behind Trump, and Trump mentions his name, and Starmer comes up, and Starmer thinks he's going to ask him to speak, and Trump just tells him to go back, stand back in line. I mean, humiliated the prime minister of the United Kingdom. I mean, I'm happy to see it. Like, I don't like the guy, and I don't like the British government, but I'm also I'm not saying that any type of American chauvinism. I'm just happy to see it, but the same thing too. You had that whole spectacle of the prime minister of Pakistan being brought forward and saying, I nominate Donald Trump for next year's Nobel Peace Prize. And then Trump's like, I had no idea he was going to do that. I mean, so it's just so over the top. And that none of this can be taken seriously. The consequences, of course, are as we know, genocide. But we're supposed to believe that these are people that can be reasoned with. These are people that can be spoken to. These are people that there's any chance of having dialogue with. And, we could extrapolate that then to how would the Russians view this? How do the Chinese view this? How do the Iranians view this? How do the Venezuelans view this? There were reports end of last week that the Venezuelans were offering the Americans oil to get them to back off. You can understand that because they know what they're up against. They're up against brutes who live in their own reality, who think that they could manufacture something like that spectacle in Sharm el-Sheikh and people will actually buy into it. Right? I mean, so I think the danger from that as these people like to see themselves in the mirror, as they like their own film clips. I said this to Judge a couple weeks ago, and he's a Notre Dame graduate, but so he appreciated it. But you've got more of an international audience, so I may have to explain it a little bit. But the way that American policymakers view or how American policymakers prepare or try and understand other countries, how their policies are actually working in this world, what they're up against, etc. It's similar to the Notre Dame football team. Rather than watching tape of the opposing team that they're going to play this weekend, rather than watching like those games they've played, that they watch the movie Rudy, which, if people know, is a really hackneyed, corny, sappy movie from the 1990s about a smallish guy who makes it big time on the Notre Dame football team, right? That's what it's like. The Americans come into this, and the Brits and the rest of and then the continental Europeans, they come along as well. Again, like the little fish under the mouth of the shark, and they believe their own mythology. And so I think the importance of Sharm el-Sheikh, as I said, was not just the Palestinians and how they're viewing it, but as well those outside the region who are recognizing that there is no sense in trying to negotiate with the Americans to have any dialogue. We need to find ways to work around them.
What was so amazing to see all these leaders just somehow bowing to Donald Trump. Donald Trump bowing to
this is
Netanyahu in Israel.
Yeah, and I think this is the crux of why they didn't like Trump in his first administration, because he exposed them for who they were. This is always the relationship between the Europeans and the Americans in the last 80 some odd years. It's always been this way. You can point to different things. You can point to, say, 1956, when Eisenhower puts the French and the British right in their place and tells them to get the hell out of Suez, right? That might be the most dramatic, but the domination or the clear primacy of the American empire, both in the Cold War and in these last 30 some odd years, the Europeans have been vassals of the empire. They may be the first among the vassals, but they are vassals. And I think that's why they hated Trump so much, was because unlike any of his predecessors, he was crass, he was vulgar. He just put things out there very bluntly and straightforwardly. And so whereas if the Germans weren't building ports quick enough to allow us to ship them liquid nitrified gas, Obama or Bush or Clinton or whoever would have had a much more refined, behind closed door conversation with Merkel than, say, Trump did, who called her out. He probably posted something on Twitter, about it. We go back and look. But so I think this is why the Europeans really hate Trump, because he shows clearly their role in the American empire, and that it is one that they should be ashamed of, and for good reason. They're so disliked by their own people.
It's not just about the foreign leaders. Even within the administration, the Trump administration, the tone is the same, the atmosphere is the same. Here is what Rubio said. I think, it's amazing.
In my mind, I think in the mind of everyone in this room, probably one of the most important days for world peace in 50 years. And that's not an exaggeration.
Only 50?
Maybe 100. Certainly since the end of World War II, Mr. President.
Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner.
See, the most important thing that been done in the last 50 years, and Donald Trump asked Rubio, in the last 50 years? No, he said no. It's probably the last 800 years.
Yeah. I mean, these
everybody should just sit there and just say, "You are the best. You are doing something that no one could have done it before."
They do that. If you ever want to subject yourself to something, if you ever want to get into like some type of self-masochism, right, self-sadism type of thing, watch one of his cabinet meetings. And it's just this collection of sycophants around the table who are the secretaries, the head of these American agencies and department, incredibly important positions, who everything is just a tribute to Donald Trump. Mr. President, 295 days, whatever it is, 295 days into your administration, we have just seen unparalleled growth in this, and they're just making stuff up and lying about things, all just throwing this praise at the president, just lionizing him as if their lives were at stake. And essentially their political lives are. If they fall in his disfavor, they're out. They're gone. And maybe even their lives are, because then his followers, the brutes that infest this country, who follow him on Truth Social, they'll send these people death threats then. So the thing, reality is that you have a government that is composed in the United States of either these sycophants, of men and women who are con men and criminals, just like their boss, or they are men and women who have gotten to the position where they're at because they understood how to succeed in an incredibly rigged and corrupt political, economic, and media ecosystem here in the United States. I mean, none of these people you look at who are in positions of authority in the Trump administration are any of them to be admired. Any of them to be admired. So this is what you get. So you get like that type of idiocy by Marco Rubio. That is just this just vulgar flattery, and that's what you have.
Yeah. Matt, with the case of the Middle East, do you think that Iran has decided? We know that Iran has decided not to participate in what has happened in Egypt. And the other issue is the way that Donald Trump somehow, looking at Donald Trump in Israel, it was so, look at it, it was strange. At the same time, it was, different from what we usually see from Donald Trump, because everybody, as you mentioned, tries to just bow him and, just to say you're the best. But he was doing the same in Israel toward Netanyahu. And
Right.
He asked the president of Israel to pardon Netanyahu. Where does it come from? Is he, because he sees Netanyahu as someone that could facilitate what he has in his mind, or he literally, he's afraid of Netanyahu for some reasons? I don't, that no one knows what is that reason, but there has to be some reason behind this sort of behavior. Donald Trump is not Donald Trump. He's someone else in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe his admiration for Netanyahu comes from a place of likes, right? I mean, like the similarities there he sees in Netanyahu himself, and I don't mean that in a manner in which it's superficial. I mean it in a way that he sees a man who has succeeded in the manner that he did. He sees a man who views the world, who views his society, who views these institutions the same way that he does. That Netanyahu has mastered the Israeli space, just as Donald Trump has done the same for the American corporate media and now political space. So I think that is a lot of it. And it goes back to what I was saying about Donald Trump's cabinet. These are men and women that those qualities I ascribe to them, those are all qualities that Donald Trump embodies. And again, it's superficial where it's like, oh, I like how he looks or talks or he sounds like me or he repeats back exactly what I'm saying. But he understands, though, what it is that he understands that these people have figured out to succeed just as I figured out to succeed. And with that, we can, join forces and do great things or whatever. But certainly his commentary to the Knesset was as revolting as you'd expect. Calling out Netanyahu to be pardoned was, I feel, the least of it. Here's one convicted felon calling for the pardon of someone who should be convicted. So, but mainly the idea of like, our weapons are the best weapons. You won this war. The Israelis know that whatever decision they make, they are going to have the backing of the Americans. as long as it falls in line with Trump's needs, though. That's a big caveat. So Trump did not get the Nobel Peace Prize. What does Trump need to do this coming year to get it next year? You know, it's incredible that we're even talking about this in a manner that's not tongue in cheek or being sarcastic. We're talking seriously about this. This seems to have been a real consideration for this ceasefire, this ultimatum. It wasn't a plan really, or a peace plan. It was an ultimatum. That seems to be the consideration, was the Nobel Peace Prize. So does that factor into when the Israelis are allowed to restart their genocide? Excuse me, what type of decent interval does there need to be before the Israelis are allowed off the leash again? Right? I mean, so you know, that I think that's all stuff we just have to wait and see. I think though most of us, we would bet what we have on, and that's what's coming.
Do you see, Matt, Pakistan is somehow an important country in the region? How do you see what's going on in Pakistan? Because Pakistan, on one hand, Israel says Pakistan is one of the most dangerous countries when it comes to the foreign policy of Israel, said after Iran, Pakistan, because they are Muslim, they have nuclear bombs and all of that. We know that the United States has strong connections with the military in Pakistan. On the other hand, Pakistan has some sort of, relationship, important relationship with China, with Russia, with Iran.
Yeah.
Who's running the show in Pakistan, or who has the leverage in Pakistan? Let's put it this way. Who has the upper hand?
The military in Pakistan and the intelligence services do. And we've seen that the way they were able to suppress and jail politicians there. The way they're able to subvert whatever you want to call their democracy. The Pakistanis have been battered around for decades now by the Americans. Either we're very close to them, or we're blaming them for their war on terror. We're moving closer to the Indians, so now the Pakistanis are out. I mean, it's been just one change after another in Pakistani-American relations, going back to the 70s, really. I mean, so you have maybe even goes back further, but I think what you're seeing is a class in power now, military intelligence class in power, that has understood that. And Neil knows that they are in a position with their nuclear weapons, with the size of their country, with their location, with what they feel they've been able to do militarily. Certainly the commentators who looked at the Pakistani-India war back in the spring, that short series of air battles and artillery battles, the Pakistanis performed very well. And they found that they performed very well using Chinese weaponry. And now they also see the Americans, they see where they were on the outs with India. They're on the outs with America because the Americans wanted to move closer to India, all because of China, right? That now they see the Americans, through their own bungling and ineptitude, are on the outs with the Indians. And I think the Pakistanis understand that that's going to be the way it's going to be with the Americans. It's going to be schizophrenic. It's going to be back and forth. It's going to be this incredibly intemperate and unreliable relationship. And I think they're moving forward to chart their own path. They have that security agreement with the Saudis. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, both for the Saudis and for the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have offered to extend their nuclear weapons umbrella to the countries of the Middle East. I mean, that's a huge deal. That's a huge deal. I mean, you normally only associated nuclear weapons umbrella with two countries before, right? And now I don't even know I guess maybe Belarus falls under the Russian nuclear umbrella, but I don't know, but like now you have Pakistan saying this is the case. So I think that the Pakistanis are in a position where they have learned from the past that they have to chart their own course and they have to set their own foundations in a way that they can't be shook by the whims of the Americans. And, again, this is a consequence of American decision making, of American foolishness, of a dying empire that's struggling to hang on, and so its policy is just completely reactionary and just reaching out and trying to grab things or push things away. And so I think you're going to see maybe more nations follow suit with the Pakistanis. I mean, you can't make splits overnight, or you can't set your own course overnight, but you can see the trends. And so, we see other countries, Turkey, Indonesia, others that may find a better way to go is to anchor ourselves on our own foundations and have relationships with many. So, the benefits to these nations of the multipolar world that we are now in.
The reason I mentioned Pakistan, because Matt, when I look at the Middle East and the region, I see three countries, important countries: Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey. And somehow Turkey under the Erdogan is so much, you don't know what is the policy. Every time he says something new and he acts something different, differently from what he's talking about. And even Russia doesn't know what Erdogan wants. Iran doesn't know. These are neighbor. These are their neighbors. I'm talking about Iran. And do you think that for the Palestinian cause, how can the support coming from the other countries, who can give the support to Palestinian people? If you put this, Iran, Yemen, Turkey and Pakistan, how about the future? And how about the support they can get from these two countries, which, in my opinion, these are the key countries in the region? Is that
Right.
going to happen, in your opinion?
I mean, I think you're going to consider to see support for the Palestinians from the Yemenis and the Iranians. Have you had, and of course that will be the source of conflict for the Israelis and the Americans with those two countries. I'm like you. I don't put much into what Erdogan and the Turks say. If reading Erdogan's speeches over the last 2 years, reading what comes out of Turkish politicians' mouths or even their generals, you would think that they would have put F-16s over Beirut a year or two ago, and they haven't. And the Pakistanis, I don't think, have an interest in being the champions of a revolutionary cause like the Palestinians, right? I think they have loftier ambitions. And so I don't see support for the Palestinians except for through the people of the world. And I mean, I think it's clear. We saw that in Sharm el Sheikh again. All these nations rushed there, and I know I was really critical of the Europeans, but a lot of regional nations and Muslim nations there as well. And they were just as willing to. They demonstrated that they are willing to go along with whatever Trump does, regardless. There might be some firmly worded statement that comes from the Qataris and and the Jordanians and the Indonesians about how, but it's not going to matter anything. I mean, there was a story, I don't know if you saw this in the Washington Post last week, about the increased military cooperation between Israel and states throughout the region, via the American military, and not the American military as some hub for it, which it functions in many ways, but as the Israelis actually working directly with, sitting in the same rooms as the Qataris or the Jordanians, thinking that anything else is going to occur is foolish. So I think the Yemenis and the Iranians will do what they can, particularly the Yemenis. But I think the Palestinians, God help them, are on their own, except for the support they get from around the world. And we've seen with two recent flotillas, hundreds of people willing to put themselves in harm's way to try and break that siege. We continue to see it with the doctors and the healthcare workers who are going into Gaza, risking their lives in an attempt to save some. And we'll see that as things in the West Bank deteriorate, as Israel ramps up its annexation, as Israel turns the rural parts, not even the rural parts, the areas outside the major cities in the West Bank, as it turns those into Gaza, which is coming, we'll see the same thing there. And so I think it's a question for us as we recognize this, that no one is going to help the Palestinians. They would have done it already if they were. Then what do we do? What can we do? And what meaningful things can we do? I mean, the shows of solidarity and everything are important, but what meaningfully can we do? And so this is when you start thinking about what occurred, say, in the Spanish Civil War and the Abraham Lincoln Brigades and things like that. All the good socialists and communists who came from around the world to try and protect the Republic in Spain. What can be done in a similar manner to the West Bank? You know, I don't think it's practical that you're going to raise brigades of people to go and fight with the Palestinians. But is it possible to do other actions? Can we increase our direct action in a way to cause problems with trade? I mean, we see a general strike today in Spain. How do you keep those things going? How do you keep those things effective in the fact that they actually have teeth behind them? You know, for years we've heard about these hacking collectives that are out there who are supposedly wearing white hats. Where they have some of them, because there's been a whole trove of emails that have been leaked that have shown all kinds of things in terms of relationships between Israeli officials and American journalists and things like that. But you know, is there a collecting hack? Are there collective hacktivists out there that can turn off Israel's gas pumps for 5 days? You know, I mean, is there some way to take the fight to the Israelis, to protect the Palestinians, to stand with the resistance in a way that's going to make a difference? And I think that's something that a lot of us are struggling with. There was an effort, I don't know where it's at now, it seems to have been dropped, led by Colombia's president, to get the United Nations to put forward a protective force to, intervene in Gaza. I mean, that was always kind of a fantasy. What militaries are going to sign up to go and fight the Americans and the Israelis? First of all, none of these militaries have the reality of them. They don't have the ability to do a forced entry into Gaza, let alone that you're really going to fight the Americans and the Israelis. That's what you're choosing to do. I mean, so, you know, it doesn't exist at the state level, again, besides Yemen and Iran. I mean, maybe things will fall apart with Syria and Shura, who's in Moscow today. You know, maybe that will get involved, you know, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Matt, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump and even JD Vance, it seems that nothing is changing in the case of Ukraine, and Donald Trump says if Putin doesn't decide to settle the conflict, I will settle it with Tomahawk missiles, sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. It's unbelievable. And here is what Pete Hegseth said, Matt.
Pearl is the initiative where European countries buy U.S. weapons, transfer to NATO for the fight in Ukraine to bring peace to that conflict. And if there's anything we've learned under President Trump, is the active application of peace through strength. Yes. You get peace when you are strong, not when you use strong words or wag your finger. You get it when you have strong and real capabilities that adversaries respect. And I believe that's what NATO is doing. I believe that's what the Pearl Initiative is. So our expectation today is that more countries donate even more, that they purchase even more to provide for Ukraine to bring that conflict to a peaceful conclusion.
It seems someone is trying to deceive people, to rob people the best way possible.
Right. First of all, I mean, it doesn't get brought up enough, but it should. The United States pays such a significant share of the NATO budget that this idea of NATO purchasing weapons, a lot of it's laundered American tax dollars, essentially. I mean, so I feel like we always have to bring up that point. But also, too, the way, again, the lack of self-respect by the Europeans. You have Mark Rutte, the guy was the prime minister of Holland for 12 years. And here he is on stage nodding like some bobblehead doll in agreement with this drunken former talk show host, right? I mean, the whole, I really just wish the Europeans would just take stock of who they've actually are and where they're leading their nations to. And in this, there's two prongs to that with the Europeans. One is the escalation of the war, which, we all understand how that can develop into something that would be ruinous for all of Europe. But then the other is like, say you're able to manage the war. And, there are plenty of perfect examples of those who thought they could manage a war, right? But say you can manage this superhuman force of war and just keep it simmering the way you want it, uh, what does that do though in terms of the amount of money you're spending, the debt you're putting yourself on, and the way you're ignoring the needs of your own people? They're banking on this idea that this militarism, that this lust for war that they possess will be replicated among their people. And their people will say, you know what, this issue with paying for heat, this issue with our declining healthcare, this issue with our degrading infrastructure, our housing problems, our lack of jobs, et cetera, the migration issue. They're banking that their people, their constituencies, their public are going to forget about that because of the Russian bear, right? I mean, this is something they've used the Brits have been using it since the 1840s. So to see this, and then this ridiculous idea that the Tomahawks are going to win the war. I mean, it's so nonsensical, and it's been disproved. So it's been disproved by all the other wonder weapons that didn't win the war. And then the converse can be said. If the Russians could win the war with a magic weapon or a wonder weapon, they would have done the same thing. Neither of these countries are going to put forward weapons that are going to win the war. But they hold on to it because it is a talking point. It continues the narrative. It's something that the media binds onto because this is a good headline, right? This keeps the storyline going for a week or two or three. And then by the time the story tires out, you bring in something else or something else comes up. But the reality is you've got a Ukraine that's in desperate situations, whether it's their manpower issues, whether it's the reality that they are outmatched and outclassed by Russian leadership in this. And when I say that, I extend that to the American generals who are leading this war. The American generals have been beaten by the Russian generals. It's that clear. As a former American Marine, I don't like that. I really don't. I wish we had some accountability for it. Because we're going to lose whatever these fools get us into, whether it be with the Russians, whether it be with some jungle war in Venezuela, whether it be with the Chinese. Exactly. That's the most ridiculous one, Nima. Yeah. We couldn't defeat the Yemenis in the Red Sea. We had to essentially use those B-2s to bring about to bring about a Deus Ex Machina-like event to end the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, because we were running out of weapons. The Israelis were running out and we were running out. We had to end that thing soon, right? I mean, and we're going to go to war with China? I mean, in the commentary in this country about how China is pulling away from us. China pulled away from us a long time ago, and we're never catching up. And the smart thing to do for the Americans is to understand that, understand our place in the world, understand what strengths we have, because we have a lot, and understand how we can transition those to be one of the prime nations of the world without having to have this hysterical fit that we are no longer the prime nation. Yeah, I mean, this idea with the Tomahawks is just madness. It's madness. And it's even made even more mad by, you see the emphasis on, and we're making money off of it. The Europeans are buying them from us. So it's a good deal all around, I mean, so that there's that there's that crassness, the vulgarity of it that exposes that these people can't even think through good optics.
Seems that they're moving toward China, Matt. You look at NATO, you look at the arguments on the part of Scott Bessent coming out, and we have to punish China because they don't understand our language. They have to understand it because the world, he's talking about the world is against China right now. I don't know what is the definition of that in the mind of Scott Bessent, but here is, you get the tone in Washington through the mouth of, Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. Here is what he said about China and Russia.
likely that China will force the junior partner in that relationship, being Russia, under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, to move against NATO here. To keep us busy. For all these reasons, we have to make sure that we work as strongly together with them. And then on the hybrid threats, this is, of course, a big worry, and we are working on it.
It's not anymore Russian imperialism. Is right now it's Chinese imperialism. It seems that China would force Russia as a little kid. They don't understand even the relationship between the two countries.
They don't. Well, I mean, I think what he's putting his own position into their relationship, right? He's extrapolating, or he's trying to utilize the European American relationship to understand or to contextualize or to articulate the Russian Chinese relationship. This is the terrible thing about not just the Americans but the Europeans as well. We have a very difficult ability for us to understand our adversaries in a light of their own or with their own agency, or understand, essentially be in their shoes, is really difficult for Westerners, incredibly difficult for Westerners. And this is bringing out, one of the main reasons for our downfall, with this Western hegemony. Yeah, I mean, the need to tack on Russia and China as this dual-headed hydra or monster, one head being bigger, the head that decides where it goes, I guess, is, I think, also part of the Europeans' fear that at some point, if you have 12 years of Republican domination of the White House, say, and you have a foreign policy that's Trump and then, say, 8 years of Vance or someone similar, that eventually the shift to China will occur. That whatever's happening right now with Trump and Zelensky getting ready to play footsie on Friday and the Tomahawk thing and everything else, that at some point the Republicans are going to get it together and they are going to shift to China like they've been saying they're going to do for 20 some odd years. People remember Condoleezza Rice came in as Bush's national security advisor in 2001. China is our biggest concern, she said, right? This is something that, go back to the Clinton years and look how Clinton and his people reacted to China, including sending the aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Straits, those types of things. This has been going on for 30 years, essentially. At some point, the Americans may actually get their act together and do the thing that they say they've been wanting to do for 30 some odd years. And that terrifies the Europeans, particularly people like Ruta, who need the Americans. And so we have to have the Russians tacked on to the Chinese in a way that allows for your storyline of this dual-headed monster, of this hydra or whatever, to be of compelling nature, right? And they'll continue to push it, and the Western media will go along with it, and the parliaments will go along with it, and these fools in Europe will maybe actually try and reach 5% spending on GDP. I don't think that'll ever happen, but you'll see them prioritize militarism over the welfare of their own people, and continuing abreast or continuing in pace as vassals of the American empire, as the American empire just continues to devolve and degrade and defecate itself.
I don't know it's some sort of the continuation of the policy of containment of China, or they really feel that China would attack them for some reasons. Because what does China have with Europe to attack them?
I don't exactly. I mean, with the what first of all, what European force is going to travel halfway around the world to take on China? I mean, they couldn't even assemble a European auxiliary to take on the Yemenis in the Red Sea. If people will recall, go back to the beginning of 2024, when, and I can't remember what the exact phrase, but it was something along the lines of the coalition of the willing, something silly like that, something preposterous or dumb like that. That was, and they had 20 nations lined up to take on the Yemenis and to free the Red Sea and restore international trade. And I think there was a British destroyer there at one point. You know, I mean, like it was so minimal. It really exposed the paucity, the shallowness, the hollowness of the European military that you know in that they like to bang on about, that they like to bang their chests about, and that they're somehow going to take on China. I mean, certainly this has been around for a while, this idea of NATO getting involved with China, because particularly, say, prior to February 2022, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was a lot of questioning out there about what are we going to do? What's NATO going to do? And some people were more aggressive than others in terms of saying, you know, it's long lived past its expiration date. But there are others who said, you know, we have to find other reasons for us to be about. But this idea of them fighting China, it's even more ridiculous than the idea of the United States fighting China. But there are people who believe it, and you see various proposals being put through the United States Department of War, through the National Security Establishment, that, you know, you can read them as simply just the progress, the inertia of the military-industrial complex, wanting more things, finding justifications for new weapons or equipment or whatever. Or you could also read it with the idea that there's a policy behind it that's driving this, you know, and you get in this question of which is driving which. Is the military-industrial complex driving policy, or is policy driving the military-industrial complex? I think they're so intertwined and they're so incestuous that you can't pull them apart anyway. But yeah, I mean, so you see that there are many Americans who believe that war with China is inevitable and that they will do it. And whether it's their own actions that bring it about, you know, so be it.
That's dangerous. That, you know, I don't know how to describe it, but there is no chance of, you know, that would be hugely consequential for the whole world,
Oh, it
East,
would be
West, Middle, and
yeah. I mean, and the idea of the Americans that they would keep the fight contained to that first island chain in the South China Sea, essentially. The buffers would be Korea and Japan, and then eventually Guam. You know, that's where you could contain the war. By the time the war expanded, you know, this is the way the Americans thought about Europe for all these years, in which the Russians have, you know, Sergei Lavrov in particular has disabused them of that. No, it won't be contained to Europe. You know, so the nice thing about being an empire with the Pacific and Atlantic on either side is you got some really nice buffers. So if you do go into war, you have time to have that war absorbed in someone else's country among their people before you have to absorb any of it. That's been the American strategy for 80 years. And the Chinese have been clear as well. The Chinese 2 decades ago made comments about, you know, hitting Los Angeles with nuclear weapons. You know, I mean, so, you know, and if you talk to people like Larry Wilkerson, like our friend Larry, you know, who still takes part in these war games, he tells you the war games with China go nuclear all the time. Maybe not everyone, but 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 go nuclear. And it's usually the United States that initiates it because they're losing, you know, and you just can't, you look at this matchup right now. You look at the way American equipment, weaponry, munitions, technology, intelligence, leadership have performed in Ukraine, right? It's going to get a failing grade. You look at the way we've been able to glimpse some of China's stuff, like, say, the Pakistani-India conflict last spring. You know, you have an idea then that, okay, maybe this is not a fight we want to get into. And then we match up industrial capacity. And we see the way that the Chinese can build in a way that we cannot. I mean, this is similar to Russia, Ukraine. We've seen the way that Russia has been able to build. I mean, they're back to exporting weapons again. You know, I mean, their construction of drones is far outpacing not just the Ukrainians, but the Europeans and the Americans. I mean, so if we can't outmatch the Yemenis, if we can't outmatch the Iranians, if we can't outmatch the Russians, which, according to all the smart people in Washington, D.C., is nothing more than a country, a gas station masquerading as a country, we can't match those countries, what are we going to do in a war with someone that we actually respect and are afraid of? I mean, everyone in DC, their commentary about China, it's respectful. I mean, it's ludicrous, it's hyperbolic, right? It's exaggerative, it's xenophobic, it's all these other things, but they recognize China's strength, and that's why they're so afraid of them. You listen to these people. We have to do this because China's building A, B, and C. We have to do this because China is able to produce X, Y, Z. China has these resources, we don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with these nations that we disparaged that we couldn't defeat, how are we going to go against the country that at least we accurately recognize the strength of it? Yeah, I mean, so it's just the madness of the megalomania of empire. But this has been history, right? This has been the way it's always been. And I think, though, whereas in the past empires unraveled and fell apart and went their way, sometimes over centuries, that's not the world we live in anymore. And I think, because of technology, an imperial decline is going to be something much quicker than we've seen before.
I hope that would never happen.
I do too. There's nothing satisfying about, right? I mean, about the prospect of being right about this. Like, it's just, I'd much rather people, 30 years from now, one of my nephews watching this and being like, wow, my uncle, guy was an idiot. He didn't get any of this right. I would really prefer that, I mean, but I don't know. I mean, I just don't see the leadership anywhere in the West that's going to change it. That's going to do something differently. We're pinning on Spain and Ireland, and those are my ancestors, God bless them. But that we're really not weighted in our favor here. I mean, like, even the Scandinavians are so terrible in all of this. And at least maybe 25 years ago, we would have thought like the Scandinavians would be decent in terms of like their outlook on these things and not being like Stube from Finland.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Matt, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
All right. Thank you, Nima.